In the following video, CU2 Global is pleased to demonstrate live the conversion of a Microsoft Access database to a SQL Server environment using the automation suite provided by 2SQL. Firstly, let's select the demonstration Access database that we will migrate to SQL Server using 2SQL. Now, we will launch the Access application and take a look at some of the objects that will be moved across to SQL Server. Microsoft Access query objects are a crucial component of any Access to SQL Server conversion project. Let's take a look at the design aspects and the outputs of one of them. It is the SQL statement of a query object that must be converted to SQL Server. This is a cross-tab query. Queries of this nature are the most complex ones to convert because the equivalent syntax in SQL Server is vastly different. Now we'll look at the data output and remember what we can. Later, after the conversion has been completed, we will again review the data output and compare the results. Let's look more closely at one of the VBA code modules. Note that there are some SQL statements in the code and also that the JET-based DAO program library is being used. JET is a client-based technology when communicating with SQL Server, and as such can cause significant performance strain. We will see later that this has been replaced by 2SQL using a true two-tier client methodology. To convert and migrate our database to SQL Server, we'll launch the 2SQL Genie. 2SQL is now determining all of the objects in this Access database. It will process all the tables, queries, forms, reports, and modules in various phases. The beginning phase for each object are in analysis mode, so 2SQL can gather all the information it needs. 2SQL will determine the properties of all tables and queries and their dependencies before it applies any changes. It will then analyze all the properties of the form and report objects that can contain SQL syntax expressions. For example, the record source property of a form can be a SQL statement. The final stages are in rectification mode, whereby 2SQL is applying changes to the Microsoft Access database and to the SQL Server database it has already created automatically. In rectification mode, 2SQL will create all the table schema in SQL Server and migrate the data. The conversion of all table schema includes column types, indexes, foreign key constraints, validation rules, and default values. It will then convert all the query objects in Microsoft Access to SQL Server views or stored procedures. SQL Server triggers will be created by 2SQL when necessary to replicate exactly the behavior of the original Microsoft Access application. The SQL statement in the forms and reports will be converted to SQL Server views. Finally, 2SQL will analyze all VBA code modules and automatically convert several commands in VBA framework to SQL Server compliance. It will also convert the DAO object library to ADO as part of the optimization process. 2SQL is now informing us on the number of issues found for each object and whether or not this issue has been rectified to become SQL Server compliant. Here, the 2SQL alert messaging system is warning us that it has found some SQL statement syntax in the VBA code that may need manual intervention later. These alerts are logged by 2SQL for review and follow-up, so let's turn it off and complete the conversion. Now, we have a notification that 2SQL Genie has successfully processed the Access database. On completion, we are presented with a summary of issues grouped against their respective 2SQL conversion components. When we expand on the components, we will see the same summary for each of the conversion categories that belong to the selected conversion component. For example, table schema field types, SQL statements, types Q to Z, and finally, let's look at the VBA framework. 2SQL has concluded that if each issue took an average of 2 minutes to rectify manually, this database would have taken 227 hours to convert. How long would it have taken your organisation to complete? 2SQL has automatically rectified more than 1,400 issues in less than 3 minutes. We'll now launch the converted Access database that 2SQL created and review what we had looked at earlier. The VBA module now uses an ADO OLE server-side cursor to process the SQL instruction in the code. All the original table and query objects have been replaced with ODBC objects connected to SQL Server. The SQL statements inside the controls of forms and reports have also been converted to SQL Server views or stored procedures, with a corresponding ODBC link in this Access database. If we now look at the same query we looked at before, in design mode we can see that it is now an Access table without any SQL statement because this now resides in SQL Server. And when we execute it like we did before, we notice the results are identical. Now, let's navigate to SQL Server and take a look at the same object, which is now a SQL Server view. 2SQL has converted this complex cross-tab query in Microsoft Access to its equivalent pivot view in SQL Server. 2SQL is capable of converting all types of Microsoft Access queries. Cross-tab query conversions are particularly compelling examples which highlight the power of 2SQL. Finally, let's execute this view to confirm SQL Server behaves the same as the new Access database. Again, we can see that the results are identical. Thank you for watching this demonstration of 2SQL. For more information, please visit our website at www.cu2global.com.